New Smyrna Beach Police Department, Office of Professional Standards. This will be a taped interview in reference to IA case number 2021-006. Today's date is Friday, December 24th, 2021, and the time is 7:03 p.m. The location of this interview is the Command Staff Conference Room at the New Smyrna Beach Police Department. Presently being interviewed is Sergeant Richard Kirkland. I am Lieutenant Mark Severance with the New Smyrna Beach Police Department. Are you aware this interview is being recorded?
I am.
As a Florida law enforcement officer in Notary Public of the State of Florida, I'm empowered to take sworn statements. At this time, I'd ask you to raise your right hand to be sworn, please. Do you solemnly swear or affirm that the statement you are about to give is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
You are being interviewed as a witness to an internal affairs investigation. Since you are not the focus of the investigation, neither union representation or an attorney need be present to represent you. You are required to answer all questions pertaining to your actions or knowledge obtained while an employee of the City of New Smyrna Beach Police Department. Failure to answer any questions may subject you to departmental charges. If any time during this interview you feel that your answers might result in disciplinary action being taken against you, so advise me and the interview will be stopped until representation is obtained. Do you understand that?
I do.
Okay. So, on December 14th, 2021, there was a CAD call asking for police to respond to 143 Canal Street in reference to a suspicious person. Are you familiar with that call?
I am.
Were you working as a Bravo shift supervisor that evening?
I was.
So you were filling in for another supervisor,
Yes,
correct?
I was on overtime. Correct.
Can you recall the details or circumstances of that suspicious person call?
Yes, I do.
What were they?
The suspicious person call came out, was dispatched to Galt about a male bothering customers and asking for money. I don't know how far you want me to go. Galt responds, and that's the circumstances of the call. That's all we know as far as the call goes.
Okay, so to you it was pretty nondescript, just a person
Correct.
Bothering customers?
Yes.
Okay. Were you ever contacted by Officer Galt or Officer Beatty during the time frame of this call for service?
I was contacted by Officer Beatty after the call for service, not during it. The subject had already left the scene by the time he called me, but yes.
Okay, so you had no knowledge of what was going on at the scene at the time when either Officer Galt was there or Officer Beatty was there?
Correct. Yeah, I thought it was just a suspicious person. They were going to move along, or
Okay.
that was it.
So, you said Officer Beatty calls you, you believe, at the end of his interaction
Correct.
with this person?
Yes.
Okay, can you describe the phone conversation that you had with Officer Beatty?
Yeah, he said that he was just calling to inform me about what happened. He said that he was handling a panhandler call. So obviously, immediately I was kind of thinking, what do you mean by panhandler call? He says that the subject was standing on city property and had a sign that said, God bless homeless veterans. He said that the male was refusing to identify himself, and that he had a firearm, and then but he did have a valid concealed weapons permit. I asked him, what happened. He explains to me that basically he and Galt detained the male with handcuffs. They disarmed him and confirmed that he had a valid concealed weapons permit, and that in doing so they were able to identify him, and ultimately they let him go. I asked Beatty why he was detained, and he told me that he was detained because he was refusing to identify himself. And I said, well, for what crime are you investigating? And he said that he was investigating panhandling. And he said it's against city ordinance. And I told him, no, it's not against city ordinance. And he said, well, it's against state statute as well. And I said, it's not against state statute. And I told him, I said that from what you're telling me, it sounds like you had no legal authority to seize the gentleman or his firearm, disarm him, even run his name. It doesn't sound like he was doing anything wrong.
What was Beatty's reaction to that on the phone?
He seemed kind of like taken back, like kind of shocked. Like he didn't. I don't think he grasped that I was telling him that it was not illegal. I think he truly thought it was illegal and was kind of stammering for a second. And then at one point, hold on one second. Let me refer to the report here. I forget. He did say something. He did try to tell me that that he didn't tell him about the concealed weapons permit at the same time he told him about the gun. So he was basically trying to paint the picture that, well, he told me he had a gun, so I was just going to seize the gun and make it more of an officer safety thing. And I told him that still does not work. If you don't have a crime to investigate, you can't seize the person. And it ultimately turned out the guy did tell him he had a concealed weapons permit anyway. So.
Okay, are you aware of the duration of this interaction, the call?
Well, the call came out at 19:27 hours, and I got the phone call at 19:57, so literally right at a half hour.
Okay.
From the time dispatch to the time Beatty's calling me. So I would say shorter, maybe 20 minutes, 25 minutes. Something.
Okay. Obviously, since you weren't there, you don't have a lot of details as to what happened based on the phone call that you got from Beatty, other than what he told you. Is that correct?
That is correct, yes.
Okay, now, obviously, after the fact, I met with you, you being the supervisor that night, and asked you to conduct a supervisory inquiry. That was on the following day, December 15th. And you entered your findings into an incident summary and submitted it for further review. Can you provide a synopsis of the key findings in that document and walk us through what happened?
Sure. So the ultimate findings are that the gentleman was not creating a crime, or was not committing a crime. He was completely within his rights. He was on a public sidewalk, and he was simply holding a sign saying, "God bless the homeless vets." Wasn't doing anything illegal or suspicious for that matter. They did not have a right to detain him, to seize him, his property, or anything. That was my ultimate findings. The way I got to those findings is I reviewed all the video that was recorded by the subject and posted to social media. I also reviewed the both body-worn cameras from Officer Galt and Officer Beatty. Essentially, Officer Galt gets on scene first. He goes to make contact with the male. He tries to summon the male over to him. The male didn't really appear to respond, so he approaches the male, and they have a brief interchange where Officer Galt basically tries to get him to move along and tries to convince him. The male challenges him and says, "I don't have to move along." I don't know if you want me to get into exact words and stuff, or you just want me to kind of give the
No,
synopsis,
did Officer Galt make contact with the business owner or the manager?
Not until after he had this, verbal kind of back and forth with the subject. I believe that he thought he was just going to walk up to the subject and ask him to move along, as we do on a lot of calls, and if the guy doesn't have a problem with it, moves along, no harm, no foul. Well, in this case, the gentleman says, "I have a right to be here, I'm not going to." So you can see Galt kind of is taken back a little bit, and he said, "Okay, well, let me go in and talk to the manager." So he does go in and talk to the bar staff. He tells them, the guy says that he's not going to move and that, he's on the sidewalk. I believe the bar manager tells him, "Well, he was on our property," and
So there was some dispute over what was their property, what was public property.
Correct. It appeared from watching the video that the bar manager, the reporting party, that I believe his name is Axel, thought that the entire sidewalk belonged to their business. It clearly doesn't. It's a public sidewalk, and the subject was actually standing on the farthest away on the sidewalk he could be from the business. He was literally out by where the parallel parking is.
Okay, let's back up for a minute. In your review of the body-worn camera videos and the YouTube video, primarily the YouTube video, before our officers arrive, did you see the RP Axel speak with this subject?
Yes, he initially tries to handle this incident himself. He goes out and, asks him to move along, tells him he can't be there, and of course the gentleman says that he can. He has every right to be there. He's on a public sidewalk. The Axle guy kind of challenges him and says, "No, this is our sidewalk," and he said, "No, it's not." And basically, when he meets the resistance, Axel says, "Well, fine, I'll just have to call the police then." And so he goes back in the bar. And
Okay, that brings us back to where we're at then. And so Officer Galt talks to Axel inside the bar, and then what happens?
he also called for Officer Beatty to respond as backup. And he basically, the end of the conversation is, "Well, I'm just going to have to wait for my backup to get here." So he goes back outside. He again confronts the guy, and Officer Beatty comes up on scene. You can see Officer Beatty pull in. He parks across the street on a perpendicular road there, and
So when Officer Beatty arrives, what does Officer Galt do first?
he walks over to Beatty's car and tells him, let me see here. Let's see exactly what they said. Give me 1 second. Sorry.
Okay.
Okay. Officer Beatty pulls on scene. Galt explains that he's, as they're walking up to the subject, that the subject's saying it's his constitutional right to be stand where he's standing. If the manager of the business says one of his waitresses was afraid to go outside, and I guess wait on the tables. There's a couple tables outside. So that was literally what Galt told him.
Okay. So then what happens after they both approach the subject again?
So then Beatty kind of takes over the call at this point. He makes contact with the guy and does acknowledge and says that he's on a public sidewalk, but the business said that he was begging for money. Beatty had not made contact with the RP. He's just going off at this point of what was said in the CAD call from dispatch. So he said that panhandling is against the law and he can't be panhandling out there.
Okay.
The gentleman says that he wasn't panhandling and that he was within his rights to be there. And do you want me to just?
Yes, continue.
Okay.
Yeah.
So ultimately, the guy, or Beatty, tells the guy that he can't be there and that he needs his name and information. The guy says that he's not going to identify himself. They go back and forth a few times. Beatty, basically tells him, threatens him that he's going to go to jail if he doesn't give him his identification, because he's there investigating a crime to which he claims the business started the complaint. So the male, I think, could see that he was going to be put into handcuffs, so he alerts the officers that, or at least he perceived he was going to be put into handcuffs, I should say. He alerts the officers that he is armed, and that he lawfully armed, he has a concealed weapons permit, and he kind of puts his arms out in front of him.
Okay.
Officer Beatty, and he makes it an exaggerated movement. He says, "Here's my hands out here," and Officer Beatty goes to, take the gun out of his pocket. I think that the male maybe felt a little uncomfortable with the officers taking the gun out of his pocket with his hands just being there.
Right.
So he actually suggests, guys, maybe I should be put in handcuffs. So then you see Officer Galt. That's when he comes in and puts the guy in handcuffs while Beatty's retrieving the firearm, and then ultimately searches the male, locates, I believe, some magazines in another pocket, and that sort of thing. The male, during the detention and search, says, "I do not consent to any searches or seizures." He's told them several times that he's within his rights and this is a violation of his rights. He was basically broadcasting that.
So after they handcuff him in front of the New Smyrna Brewery there, what happens?
Well, I forgot to note, as they were going to handcuff him, Officer Beatty takes his sign out of his hand and puts it on the pole.
Yeah.
I don't know if that really is of note, but ultimately they walk him across the street to where Officer Beatty parked his patrol car.
Okay.
Officer Beatty is explaining to him that this is the reason as to why he's getting arrested, or why he's been detained, I should say, not arrested.
Right.
And the guy says, well, since you have my firearm, I'll go ahead and let you get my concealed weapons permit. And he tells him it's in my wallet, in my pocket. He directs Beatty to the wallet, and ultimately Beatty gets his concealed weapons permit. He uses that to identify him by name and date of birth. He runs him on teletype and confirms that he's not wanted. He doesn't run the concealed weapons permit number to verify that it's valid.
Okay.
But he does verify that the male is not wanted. So he uses that to say, okay, now since you've identified yourself, I'm going to let you go. Basically, that's when they unsecure him. Beatty actually hands him his firearm back and tells him to put it in his pocket. Again, you can see the subject's kind of uncomfortable with that, but
Right.
ultimately he does take the gun, put it in his pocket, and again pronounces his hand movement, saying, I think he put it up on the police car, so I'm gonna leave my hand right here. And then Beatty went to go make contact with the business.
Okay. So Beatty goes into the business and makes contact with the manager, Axel. Is that correct?
Yes.
Can you describe that interaction?
Let me.
Yeah, you can refer to your report.
Beatty asks if he was immediately asked the manager, was the male seen asking for money? And the bar manager said, no, I don't think he was asking for money, but he was, reiterates that one of his waitresses was nervous to go outside or whatever. Beatty then says immediately that he's going to call the sergeant, me, to kind of, I guess, run it by me. But if he was not on their property, not asking for money, there wasn't much that he could do. He couldn't make him leave. So he kind of was telling the guy, if he's not asking for money, then we have no law violation, and I can't make him move along or anything.
Okay.
In his mind is what he
Right.
was thinking. That's when Officer Beatty leaves and goes back to the car. I forgot to mention, actually, let me go back.
Okay.
When they escorted him over to the car, the guy did make a statement. He said, I just want to put you guys on notice that you're violating my constitutional rights, and that I would proceed, or if I were you, I would proceed with caution from here forward, something to those lines. And Beatty, kind of argues with him and tells him, no, we're not violating your rights because you were panhandling, and so on
Okay.
and so forth. So ultimately, Beatty comes back over, and the guy's already unhandcuffed as before. He's got his gun. He tells him, since you weren't panhandling and asking for money, and I already identified you, basically that he wasn't going to be detained any further. And the guy asked if he was free to leave. He had originally asked for a card from Beatty. Beatty said he would go get him a card, and he goes in the car. That's actually when Beatty calls me, and the subject, I think, was kind of almost maybe tired of waiting, and he asked Officer Galt for what their names were,
Right.
and then he just says, I don't need a card, I'll just leave, and then he walks away.
Okay. Going back to Officer Galt, if I'm going to ask you a couple questions.
Okay.
If Officer Galt had not called Officer Beatty to come to the scene, what do you think would have happened?
It appeared to me that Officer Galt kind of knew he was in over his head. I don't think he really knew how to proceed. That's why he called for backup. I think he was relying on a more senior officer to kind of guide him on what to do. If he did not do that, I would like to think that he would have called me and or the corporal, one or the other. Actually, there was no corporal working that night, so call me for advice on how to proceed.
Okay.
I don't see Officer Galt going to the extent that Officer Beatty did on his own. He clearly had that opportunity several times. He went back into the business, I think, twice. He wasn't forcing the issue at all.
Did he
was
talk
just
to any
kind of-
customers outside about what was going on? You recall?
Yeah, there was one customer that was said he had been out there the whole time, and I think he asked him. I'm not 100% sure, but I think he asked him if he saw him asking for money, and the guy said no. He's just been there the whole time.
Okay.
I'd have to go back and look at the video. Nothing that really jumps out at me, but yeah, I think
Okay.
he did.
Let me back up here. Did Officer Galt ever mention anything about panhandling? Do you recall that? At the beginning of his interaction with the subject?
My report here.
Okay.
He did, he tells him, the subject tells Officer Galt that he's on the public sidewalk and is just saying, God bless the homeless vets. Galt tells him that he cannot stand in the same place and say the same thing over and over. Then goes on to tell him that he cannot beg for money because it's against city ordinance.
Okay.
The male told Galt that he was not begging for money and that it would still be illegal because that city ordinance would be unconstitutional if it existed.
Okay, we've already talked about Officer Beatty and the phone call part that happened. Do you feel that Officer Beatty and Officer Galt believe that panhandling was currently a city ordinance?
Absolutely. They both said it non-prompted on their body-worn cameras at separate times. I don't know where they would get that impression or where they may have learned that, but they definitely were under the impression that they did have legal authority to seize him based on that assumption. I don't think either one of them did anything intentionally wrong. I think that they were more or less ignorant that the fact that is that panhandling is just not illegal. We can't detain based on that. So I think they were just operating on bad assumptions.
Okay. Do you think that Officer Beatty made the decision to detain this subject because of his refusal to identify himself?
Yes, I think that Officer Beatty thought that he had the legal right to identify him because he was, in his mind, investigating a crime, and that's why he was ultimately going to detain him. It kind of took a weird turn because Beatty went for the gun immediately instead of going for handcuffs immediately, and then the male ultimately asked to be handcuffed.
Right. Covered that, yeah.
So it was, but I do think that he was absolutely going down that path. That's what he was going to do.
Okay. Can you summarize the policy violation? You proffered a couple of policy violations. The one, can you read that from the record there? The group 2.
The group 2M, violation of rules, orders, etc., issued by the city commission. It's basically he violated our rules and policies and procedures, regulations by ultimately going against what he did for preliminary and follow-up investigations. He basically detained someone without the legal authority to do so. So clearly in violation of that policy. As far as Officer Galt, I do think that he also had a duty to recognize that what was going on was not okay. But again, I think he was naive and ignorant to the fact that panhandling is not against the law, and we cannot enforce a panhandling complaint by detaining people. So I think that they were operating under the impression that what they were doing was correct, but were just misinformed.
Okay, I'm just going to ask you straight. Are you of the opinion that Officer Beatty and Officer Galt violated this subject's civil rights based on your review of the video evidence?
Yes, they absolutely did. Again, I don't think it was intentional or malicious. I think that they thought what they were doing was right, and that it just simply wasn't the case.
Okay, do you have anything further you'd like to add to this?
No, I don't think so.
Okay, this concludes the interview. As this investigation is continuing, you are ordered not to discuss any portion of this investigation except with legal counsel or your personal representative. Any request to deviate from this instruction must be directed to your commanding officer. Do you understand that?
I do.
The time is 7:28, and I'm going to terminate the recording at this time.